Hello, I'm Davis. This is my lovely wife, Rachel, and we have a big question for you. What about socialization?
What about socialization? That seems to be, that's still a hot topic all these years later.
It's one of the most frequently asked questions of people, and yet it's actually got a very easy answer in many ways.
I think it's gotten easier, right? In the 25 years that we homeschool, so initially when we stepped into homeschooling, that was everyone's concern. You know, I mean, academics wasn't even the number one thing, I don't think.
No, it was it legal? What about academics? And then what about socialization?
So like our kids are going to be freaks because they're not hanging out with other people their same age, right? And they're not doing the same things that everybody else is doing. I got to tell you though, in the 26 years that we homeschooled, and certainly today, now that we're done, I see a whole lot more obvious reasons not to have your kids socialize with the kids that are in the system than there ever were when we were homeschooling. Now, I mean, I think many of those reasons were present. They were just obscured, right?
Right.
But boy, my goodness, they've come out to play. And I think that now the socialization question ought to be the number one reason why you actually homeschool. I mean, do you really want your kids socialized by the world?
Well, and it actually was the number one reason people chose to homeschool in a study. There was a national study by the Educational Statistics, and in the early 2000s, they always asked, what's your number one reason for homeschool? And one of the reasons was academic, but then it quickly changed to negative socialization in the public or private school setting. And so that is not just a question, it's actually the reason that many people have started. And then the number one reason has changed through the years, but the point is that there's plenty of solid and positive socialization that happens when your kids stay at home. You can protect them, you can control the environment, and if you think about it, we're talking about young kids. So, and even in high school, then it becomes pretty dangerous at times, and we know all the things that are happening in the world today that our kids need some insulation from in order to mature and grow and be ready when they graduate high school to be adults that can make good decisions.
Yeah, you know, the one thing, this is not unique to me, I wish I could take credit for this, but I remember somebody talking about the whole socialization issue. And, you know, sometimes people will say, well, I want my kids to be a missionary and a light in the local public school. We'll just go with the public school setting right now. And this other person said, there's not a missionary organization on the planet that would accept a 5-year-old into their missionary program. There's not one. What are we thinking? I mean, it might sound great, but they're not ready.
They're not ready.
They're not
prepared.
Equipped, and it's putting way too big of a burden on them. And they don't know how to articulate really what's going on at school. That's what we've learned, right? COVID really pulled back the curtain, and we learned all of these things that have been going on for a really long time in the system that nobody knew. Why? Because kids that were in the system didn't know how, didn't have the words to articulate what was really going on in their schools. Now, when the parents saw it, they were like, ah! But the kids were like, oh yeah, well, that's been going on, right? And so to put them in there thinking that they can fight that battle, they're not ready.
Well, they're not. And so the question is typically, what about socialization? But there's so much behind that. And one of the ways I like to reword it is, people are actually asking, oh, how do I get my child to be institutionalized? Which I think most people would view as a negative. I'd like to think so, at least. But it's having everybody conform to the same, and that's part of what happens when you think you're sending a 6, 7, or 8-year-old to be a missionary and salt and light in a dark setting. You're saying they have to not conform to the institution with all these outside pressures and inside pressures upon them. And so there's more negative to that. And so one of the things that can happen as you think about socialization is, well, what are the activities that my kids are going to be involved in? You know, I don't want them to just be all alone, would not have friends. And so when you homeschool, I remember when we began in the early 90s, we were part of a support group and we'd get the monthly newsletter. There was more activities to do than we could possibly do every month. We had to pick and choose and sometimes say, we don't have enough time to do any of these because we got other family things we're going to do. So the point is there's plenty to do. And then as your kids get older, they may actually ask for more than is really reasonable. They want to do taekwondo, soccer, basketball, music, and everything. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the things we practically did to allow our kids to have extracurricular activities, other social settings, but we were the parents. We were, I'll say, setting up a method and a schedule and a rhythm that was possible, that didn't exhaust us, and that was healthy for all of us.
Yeah, and so I'm going to take a big step backwards and lay a foundation for this that I think gets missed, right? I think too often we want to push our kids into a situation and we want to call it socialization. So any of the things you just said, music lessons, taekwondo, soccer, or whatever, and we haven't built on this foundation. And this foundation is basic fundamental honor of God, honor of parents, and getting along with their siblings. You've got to do that in the home first, I would say, before your kids are ready to be on the soccer team. If they're not already obeying you, if they don't already fundamentally know how to get along with their brothers and sisters, share, play by the rules, all of these different things, then they're not ready for that, right? Because they're not going to make a good team player. They're not going to make a good participant in anything. They're not going to do their homework because you're not doing it in the home. And so I think the kids that are best in a socialized setting are the ones that have had a foundation laid at home, where they obey their parents and they're kind to their brothers and sisters. And it's for that reason that we focused on the socialization at home first, as a primary thing.
Let me build upon that foundation with the Deuteronomy 6 passage.
Yes.
That talks about the best thing, the most important thing we can do for our kids is to help them fall in love with God. And to love them with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then 4 times when this can happen. When you rise up, when you lie down, when you sit, and when you walk along the way. And so these extracurricular activities, this socialization idea, are all about what are you doing when you leave the house, when you're getting out, when you're walking along the way, whether that's driving in the van. And so these are actually great opportunities to do the most important thing we could possibly do. Teaching them about the relationships, how to work with other people, how to cooperate well. And so as we do that, let's think about, it's the fall of a given year. And we decide what activities are we going to do with our kids. How did we go about that? Because we were very deliberate and intentional in order to avoid some of the pitfalls. So what were some of those that we did?
Yeah, well, I remember us deciding there were going to be a couple of things that the kids were going to do, and we weren't taking a poll. So, and I think that that's a huge lesson for parents today. If there's something, I mean, there's lots of things that I can see. Some of the things I would actually characterize as a digression when it comes to parenting. And there's an overarching theme in the things that I would say have been digressing in parenthood, and that is parents' inability to say no or to set limits for their children. And you and I dared, and I really am grateful for all the years we went to homeschool conferences, because I really think that really was formative for you and I in our parenting. And we really learned the importance of saying no. Margin was a huge thing that we learned about at a conference, and setting these boundaries and laying out for our kids, these are things that you're going to do. So things that they were going to do that we didn't poll, we didn't vote on. We framed them positively, and we were enthusiastic, and the kids participated like that. Leading is an important thing. But instrument practice, like music lessons, they were going to do, and they all did Awana. So those were not things that we voted on. Do you want to participate in Awana was never a question. Do you want to take instrument lessons was never a question. Those were things they were going to do. And then they got to choose something else. So they could choose, like there was a praise dance program here in town that the girls did for years and years and years, or they could be on a soccer team. And the boys could play soccer, or they could do taekwondo, but they couldn't do both.
Right, they had to pick.
And that was because we really felt like it was important to have family dinners together. So it's one of those sit down times that you were talking about in Deuteronomy 6 that you have to really guard, right? Because the culture right now says that you need to have something for your kids every night of the week. We did too, but some of those things were at home around the dinner table. It wasn't out in the car running around crazy. And we did them all together too. So that was the other priority.
Well, and the way we like to actually say it is we made sure that whatever we put together for a weekly schedule, we could do as an amoeba.
Right,
and that was our little code word for saying we're not going to divide and conquer, where I'm taking half the kids this direction and you're taking the other half somewhere else. We would only do it if we could all go together, load up the van, go to the soccer fields, go to music practice, go to Awana, whatever it was, we went as an entire family.
Right.
And if it wasn't your night to practice, then you're cheering on your brothers and sisters.
Right. Which is really valuable, right? I mean, it's so valuable, not only the give and take and the sharing and taking turns, but cheering each other on. And so we would go to practice during the week for soccer, right? And that was always awesome. We often picked up Chick-fil-A, right? Or we made peanut butter jelly sandwiches, sat on the sideline, everybody practiced. And then on Saturday, we were at the field all day, right? Just cheering for each other. And sometimes people won, sometimes people lost. We had character building seasons, we had championship seasons. But all of that, that's socialization. And when you do the fundamental socialization within the family, then when you have your kids enrolled in Awana or music lessons or some sort of a team or an activity, you are giving them a child, a student that's prepared for that.
Right.
You're not putting on them the responsibility to teach them how to win and lose or how to take a turn or how to participate well. You're doing that fundamentally at home, and so you're giving them someone who's willing to do that. And I think that's a win-win.
Well, it is. And I always felt for the families that showed up to practice late because they were coming from some other activity, and then they had to leave early because they were going to be late to the next activity. And you could tell the children were exhausted. The parents were exhausted because they had way overcommitted themselves for that day, let alone the week. And so part of this is to have just a pace of life that's healthy for you as parents, because it's a lot of work, for the kids because they're young. And I remember many Wednesdays were really long days for us because there was Awana typically on Wednesday night. And so that was nap day. And we made a point to say, hey, we got to factor this in because it's going to be a later night. We don't want kids to be grouchy or tired. And so when you homeschool, you have that flexibility to put in a nap day because you know what that day is already scheduled to look like.
Yeah, I think it would be important for families to take some time and, instead of this word socialization floating out there like a big bad monster, actually sit down and have a conversation about what they want that to look like. What are actually your objectives for socialization? Because the world has one. And I think the institutionalization, and I'm even going to add the indoctrination of an agenda, is actually what they mean when they say socialization. And they want your kids indoctrinated. And so they feel threatened when you extract your children from that. So I would suggest it's valuable for you to sit down as a husband and a wife and even having a conversation with your kids. This is what we mean by socialization. We mean good citizen skills. We mean the ability to share, to give and to take, to consider others, to be kind, to be patient, to know how to win well, how to lose well. This is what we mean, and this is how we're going to go about actually accomplishing that, right? I mean, just imagine, just for a moment, a world where we did those things, right? Where it wasn't this, but it was this. And I would suggest that the people that we all look up to even now still, and I hope that this is able to carry out, are the people that practice those things. Are the people that are not just yelling and screaming because they didn't get their way. They're not sore losers. They're not just pulling out a weapon, but they know how to have a conversation. And that happens at home. So my word would be, don't underestimate the socialization, the fundamental socialization you do around your dinner table, when you play a family game on family game night, when you go on a walk, when you're in a van. I mean, my goodness, socialization in a van is a thing. My parents lived 1,000 miles away from us, and that long trek to Texas, that was a thing. And getting along for that long of a time, that was socialization skills. So we often think that the only kind of valid socialization happens in a school building. And I'm just going to say that's not where it happens.
Well, and to summarize, family is that starting point for socialization, as you said. And it's the fundamental one. It's the one that's going to last a lifetime. And it connects so strongly to Deuteronomy 6 and those 4 moments when you can be a family, when you can do the extracurricular activities, gets the socialization, all of it that's positive and healthy.
And it's especially great if you have that, you're doing it in the family, you have concentric circles, right? You do it in the family, and you're doing it in your church community, and then you're doing it in your neighborhood or whatever, and you're engaging, but it's got to be from the center out, not from the out to the center. It doesn't work that way.
Right. So socialization is not a negative word. It's something that can be very positive for your family. When you think about socialization, think about being socially wise. This is Davis and Rachel. Thanks a lot.